Hey there guys, and welcome back. So here we have today a little web applet type deal, and I was basically just looking for something simple to test the arcade stick with, and I thought this would be an interesting idea. There's a few different interfaces I want to have for the arcade joystick prototyper, and a JavaScript interface would be one of them for web stuff. So I started looking into the Gamepad API, which evidently exists, I found out, and this is what I came up with. So right here you can see on my GitHub, I uploaded to GitHub. This is where you can find it for the code, and I'm just going to go over how it works and some specifics. So that's the deal with the stream today. So after you download it, one of those things, if you haven't used GitHub before, code, download zip. This is just a single web page. So all you gotta do is open it up in a browser, and this is what you're greeted with. So as you can see right now, and there is no gamepad connected is what it's saying. However, as it turns out, I actually do have a gamepad connected. So that is obviously incorrect. So let me open this up. Oh, this is good. Okay. Live on stream, right? Live on stream debugging. This is a first. One of these things you test and test and test, and then something goes wrong when you are live. Excellent. Let me unplug and plug back in. I think I know why this is, but that is still a bit obnoxious. There we go. All right. I got my Xbox controller plugged in. All right. To answer the question as to why that happened, and therefore, this is one of those reasons why I wanted to do this, because I want to make sure if anything comes up, you are aware. I was expecting it not to be up, not to be displayed when I hopped over here, because I loaded the web page after the gamepad is plugged in. And with the Xbox controller, unlike the arcade prototype stick, that will not actually register if it's already plugged in until after you hit the stick. So I knew it wasn't going to be up there at first, but when I unplugged it and plugged it back in, it came back up. It's a little, I'm assuming the reason why it didn't work the first time when I hit the stick, it didn't just automatically pop up that time, I'm assuming is because I actually alt-tabbed over to the other screen when I plugged in the stick. So one of those side edge cases I did not actually test out beforehand, but evidently that's a thing, and that's something I'm going to have to check out later on. One of those things, just improve the code to avoid that. But if your stick is already plugged in and you load the web page up after it's plugged in, then expect not to see it, but after you press a button or two, it should pop up. Alright, so that is the first thing to touch on. The second thing is, as you can see, we've got all these axes, but nothing on them. All these axes, all these buttons, etc., including the buttons for the joysticks, for the analog sticks button, rather. And the way we fix that is by making a mapping file. I'm including on the GitHub a mapping file for both the generic USB board, which is what we're using in the arcade stick prototyper right now. So I'm including a mapping for that already, and for Xbox controller, since I have an Xbox controller. Anything else, you'll have to make your own, but we just choose a mapping. And let me come in here. You're not going to be able to see me navigating through it because of how it captures, but I've got to navigate to where this is being held right now, which is in documents, and I'm just opening up Xbox map.json is all I opened up here, and now you can see that there, and you can see now everything is labeled. So that's how you get labels onto your things. I explained this in the GitHub in the README here, so README has usage and whatnot. A mapping file is just going to look for buttons and axes. You can add extra information into the mapping file if you want, but by default the web page here is going to ignore all the extra stuff, and it's just going to take anything in buttons and axes and toss it onto the buttons and axes. The Gamepad API, as far as I can tell, does not actually have any place in it, at least it did not for my controllers, to indicate what buttons were which and what axes were with. That's something you're going to have to figure out on your own, evidently. So that is axes and buttons, and I did go ahead and do a couple things here. First off, I made this shrinkable, as you can see, shrinkable, expandable, And it obviously, if we shrink this a little bit more, there we go, you can see this does that. And furthermore, and it doesn't show up as much on the or Xbox, but the generic USB card, joystick card, has like 15 axes for some reason, and I went ahead and just I made this sticky on the left here. I made the buttons sticky, so the buttons, you'll see, they don't quite scroll out immediately. They don't scroll out until you hit the bottom of the axes. So in theory, you should have the buttons most of the time available, even if you have a long list of axes. Next up is this part down here, and this very simply is somewhere where you can enter in a URL. So I'm just going to do hello world. Actually, do I still have that file? Good question. I might have deleted that file. Just checking really quick. Okay, yeah, I did delete the file. Anyway, you can enter a local file name right here, and it will open the local file in this iframe right here. So that will work. So if you have, like, for example, a test web page or something like that with sprites, whatever, to move around, gameplay, you can do that. Otherwise, you can put in any old, I don't know if this is going to get me in trouble, but any old, and it will pop up. Any old web address, and it will pop up. You may need the https:// etc. You may need all that. It's not going to necessarily know exactly where it's looking for, so make sure to include it. And also, if I try Google right here, because I pre-tested this, you can see that refused the connection. There are sites that will not let you connect to them in an iframe. They will not. You can't embed them. Is basically how it works. So some sites may not work. itch.io, I believe I tried and did not work, which is a little bit of a shame because that would be a good use case of this. But point being is you can load a web page to test down here and watch the outputs on the joystick up here. And just to fiddle some more around that, that's what the outputs look like, right? So you can see left stick, horizontal, vertical, right stick, and then all the buttons. Whoops, and I just accidentally activated the Xbox game bar. Nice. Alright, so yeah, a very simple, for right now. A very simple web page just to get us started. I'm thinking about turning this also into an extension that pops out the top part here. So skip this bottom URL part or this iframe. Just these top sets of buttons. Make an extension to put that into a tool window, a headless window that pops out, and you can have up on your screen in a corner or something like that to watch on top of something else. I still got to look into that. I haven't really settled that I will be doing that, but it's an idea, may come up. So look for it in case it does come up. And next, let's go ahead and look at some of the code. Alright, so again, this is just a single HTML page. Everything is on this page. You don't need to load anything else aside from, again, the mappings, which, for the record, since this is easy enough, this is all the mapping file is. Just grab your buttons, put in a list of button names, grab your axes, put in a list of axes names, and that's how it pulls out. Again, as far as I can tell, the Gamepad API does not provide any kind of inherent mapping, so it's not really possible until you plug the gamepad in, as far as I'm aware, to tell which button's going to be which, and which stick is going to register in what order. But it has been consistent across connects and disconnects as far as I've seen. So that is that. I'm going to go ahead and skip. I got this collapsed right now, but I'll skip all the CSS stuff because that's not the point of this video. If you need information on CSS stuff, Google, and maybe we do CSS at some point on this channel, but it's not terribly important and not relevant to the video. The rest of the HTML as well, you know, it's just I made some divs, made some iframe, made an iframe, made a bunch of labels and inputs, etc. Very simple stuff. But getting down here to the script, this is where we can start talking about some stuff. I did comment a bunch of stuff, so you will see comments through here if you need to read up some more. The most important and most relevant stuff is just the Gamepad API. So when we plug the Gamepad in, it is going to fire this gamepad connected. When we disconnect it, it will fire gamepad disconnected. So if you look to do something like this, you want to be listening for those events. Those events are going to give you an ID. Well, it's going to give you a gamepad. So let's grab the update connected here. So that event, you can tell whether it's gamepad connected, gamepad disconnected. And then it will also give you e.gamepad, so event.gamepad, all right, as an object. And the index, the gamepad.index, is what you're going to want to keep track of. If you save the gamepad object itself, that will not be updated for button presses, so you should probably not bother keeping that around. It's irrelevant as far as I can tell, but keep its index, and what you'll end up doing with that is using navigator.getGamepads, and then using that index to find the gamepad. So if you happen to have 3 or 4 different joysticks plugged in for some reason, then you'll get, whatever gamepad you're interested in, whatever joystick you're interested in. Just take a note of that one, and then every single time you want to check for button presses, go navigator.gamepads to get the full list, the updated list of updated states of the gamepads connected to the computer. And then grab the index, just look up the index for the one that you registered up in here. So that's the first thing. The next thing is obviously gamepad.buttons, gamepad.axes. This is going to have a list of value. Well, it's going to have a list of objects, and each object is going to have, actually, I take that back. The axes are a list of values. I can't remember whether or not the gamepad buttons are a list of objects with value. Let's look really quick. For let button. Let me just come down here to poll really quick because I can't remember off the top of my head. Button index. Yeah, okay. If gamepad.buttons index.value. So yeah, the buttons are an object that have a value to them. The axes are not. You can see here, this is axes just index, and that will return a value. So that's just a list of values. This is a list of objects. So that's how you query those guys. Otherwise, up here with the create GUI, when we create it, I just go ahead and insert a bunch of, CSS-based widgets, basically, based on the number of buttons. So that is pretty simple and straightforward. The load map thing is just, load up a file, read the file, and then I have a separate function for parsing the file into the buttons to put the text on. That's all very simple and straightforward, basic stuff. And then, like I said, down here in poll, which is really the meat of it, which is we're using window.requestAnimationFrame. So you start it down here in your, on load event. And then one of those things, you got to call it each and every single time. Request animation frame is suggested over set interval or set callback, or set timeout rather. It's suggested rather because request animation frame waits until you're done screwing with it, done executing stuff, to redraw the frame. And what that means is that if, for example, we're dealing with the canvas here and I'm drawing a whole bunch of circles on the canvas, not the situation we're in right now, but if that were the case, I might be halfway through drawing some kind of complex circle shape, whatever, and all of a sudden the window, or the screen rather, the window refreshes itself, it re-blits itself onto the screen, and all of a sudden I got half a shape. It's one of those things, they call it tearing. Yeah, tearing. And there's another name that I'm blanking on right now, but you end up with a bunch of tearing and whatever the other thing is called, just basically broken frames when you use set timeout, set interval. However, obviously with this, we have to, every single time we exit the function, recall request animation frame to make sure that we're constantly updating the animations, constantly recalling this function. So that's the only catch with it. With set interval, you don't have to do this. You can just set an interval and it will keep on calling itself even if you exit early, which is useful. This obviously, this like the other two rather, I shouldn't say obviously, but this like the other two does provide a callback to identify the requested queue, okay? The request in the queue, I should say. It's one of those things you're probably not going to need it, so I wouldn't bother keeping a hold of it. In most cases, you'll know if you do need it. But the fact of the matter is that worst case scenario, you miss out on one frame in 60 seconds. I mean, 60 frames per second. Yeah, 60 hertz refresh rate, 60 frames per second. So, I mean, if you accidentally run one extra frame because you didn't cancel the request animation frame callback, it's probably not going to break anything. Probably not going to cause you problems. So, don't be super concerned about keeping a reference to it. And even, actually, I didn't even return it down here, which I probably should have, but just in case. Regardless, the rest of this, as I explained, you navigator.get gamepad to check what the buttons are. I'm iterating over the buttons here. And, yeah, this is very simple since I'm just updating the GUI, and the GUI is, or the HUD, whatever you want to call it, the GUI, the HUD. The GUI is CSS based, so I'm just adding a class to the button class here to turn it on, to change the color. Down here in axes, this is a little different because the axes, instead of being on and off like the buttons, the axes is arranged between -1 and +1. So basically, I normalize that between 0 and +2 rather. Actually, +1 because I divide by 2. Anyway, I shift all the numbers up is the short form of what I did here. I shifted all the numbers up by 1, then divided by 2 to get myself back to 0 to 1. And then multiplied that by 100% in order to get this percentage. Now, you'll see this minimum, comma 100 here. And the reason I had to do that is because for some reason, they're not supposed to do this as far as I understand from the documentation. But for some reason, one of the miscellaneous axes that I have no idea what it does on the USB joystick card, on that stick, for some reason, one of the axes returns 3.1 something or other consistently. I have no idea why. It's not an axis I can interact with as far as I can tell, but it returns 3 instead of +1 as the max. 3 point something, I should even say. It's some floating number. So I just capped it at 100% because otherwise you end up with, a bar that's 300% and that goes off the screen. So one of these things, again, just axis styled out width, updating that to be the width. So that is all the important stuff. Again, everything else is just paperwork, just busy work to make the web page work. And obviously, if you need any more information, all the comments are in here. So yeah, that's how the whole entire thing works, and that's how to use a very basic way to use the Gamepad API. So those were all the objectives I had for this stream. Again, this is a utility that I wanted to put together to have for the future, just for playing with different joysticks and keypads that I plan on making in the future. A very, very simple web page that I can just load up locally, and we can see the buttons being hit to make sure that all the buttons are actually registering, as opposed to relying on some program that we're writing in the middle of writing, I should say, to tell us that they're writing, that they're writing to the serial port. And the reason why that's important is because, in theory, it could be if we are developing this joystick in parallel with a game or something like that, we may think that the joystick is broken when it's actually the game itself that's broken. So this will absolutely not be the case going with this method. Anything that is sent by the controller will be picked up by the Gamepad API. At least as far as I'm aware, it's one of those things. If we find an edge case where that's not the case, I guess we'll find out at that point. But this should give us a baseline to tell us, okay, we do have our game controller wired up correctly, because we can see it working in this web page. And therefore, any errors are therefore not our fault on the hardware end. It's a software problem. So that's the biggest utility on this thing. And yep, that is everything from me today. I will say, because I have been working on a number of programs, add a whole bunch of words together there. Projects is the other word I added in there. I've been working on a whole bunch of projects, obviously, that I keep on coming back to and giving you updates on. And then all of a sudden I threw this one in here. I figured this one was going to take me a few hours tops. It one of those things. You estimate everything at taking a few hours, and then it takes a couple more than a few hours. So this maybe took me a total of 5 or 6 hours. But with all that being said, even though it did take me that long, which was, I was hoping only like 4 hours one night to get this done, ended up being 6 hours, which was a night and some extra hours the next day. That is still not that big of a deal. They've not put me really behind schedule because the spinny thing that I've been showing you, and I have not told you what it is, that project is now complete. I will be putting out a video on that one hopefully this afternoon. I think I will be doing that this afternoon, so look forward to that one. That again is complete, and I will be putting out that video, so that will be one project off our list. I do have an update on the home built potentiometer strips, wipers. That will be a video. Yeah, I think I might do that one as an independent video. I wasn't sure whether or not I was going to do that one along with other project updates, but that may be its own independent video. And then the joystick, obviously I've been working on the joystick, and it is together. The base of the joystick is together. I'm having some issues with the buttons working correctly. They're just plain not smooth and don't click very well. So I'm looking into fixing that one. Very brief update on that guy just here. I'm not going to obviously spend a video just saying, hey look, the buttons aren't moving terribly well, so I'm adjusting it. But the base of the joystick is done. I can throw any handle I want onto the joystick. It's just the specialized handle that we built on stream is giving me a little bit of a problem with the buttons. So that's the only update there. And aside from that, I'm looking at my desk trying to figure out what the other project was. Oh, the animation program. That's why I don't see it on my desk. The animation program I actually have not had any time to work on, unfortunately. I've been really busy at work, so I haven't spent my lunches at work doing that, which was the plan. I was planning on using lunches for adding the unit testing in and then doing some of it, when I got home in my spare time. But working on all this other stuff and being extra busy at work, that has not happened, so we have no progress on the stream animation program, getting that back up and running. So yeah, there you go. Added in an extra bonus segment of project updates. So with all that said, thank you for watching, and I hope you have a great and wonderful day, afternoon, or evening wherever in the world, and I will catch you next time.